the far east. But it does mean a bright start to Saturday for many of us. The best of the sunshine across central and western areas, though cloud across the east does filter in more as we head through the day, bubbling up into the afternoon. 1 or 2 showers possible still, these moving their way inland, perhaps a little bit wintry over the higher ground of northern England, northeast Scotland. Temperatures feeling chillier on Saturday and into Sunday. A lot of dry weather to come over the next few days, temperatures around average. See you soon.
No spin, no bias, no censorship. Dan Wootton is back. Tune in Monday for unfiltered political opinion from some of Britain's top commentators, including Celia Walden, Kelvin Mackenzie and Neil Oliver. Plus, as always, there'll be fiery debate with the superstar panel.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners on TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Good evening, I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg. State of the Nation, tonight. As the government's illegal migration bill has grabbed the headlines all week, behind the scenes it has emerged plans are in place to relax legal migration rules even further, despite net migration being at an all-time high. The slovenly and wasteful project known as HS2 has been delayed once again. And now I'm freed from the tight grip of collective responsibility, I'll be giving my unfettered thoughts. Plus, remember when speed cameras first came in and people started burning them? Well, they're back at it again, but this time with Cairns ULEZ cameras. I'll be speaking to former London Assembly member Peter Whittle later on. State of the Nation starts now. We'll also be hearing from our venerable panel, the General Secretary of the Free Speech Union, Toby Young, and staff writer at The Spectator, Cara Kennedy. As ever, I want to hear from you. Please get in touch by emailing mailmog@gbnews.uk. Before all of that, it's been a busy day, and here to keep us up to date is Rory Smith.
Good evening, I'm Rory Smith in the GB newsroom. Gary Lineker has been accused of diminishing the tragedy of the Holocaust, with the Home Secretary saying she found his comments offensive. The BBC presenter is under fire for comparing the government's language around its new immigration policy to that used by Germany in the 1930s. He has described the fallout as ridiculously out of proportion. Culture Secretary Lucy Fraser told the Commons the broadcaster must remain impartial.
As somebody whose grandmother escaped Nazi Germany in the 1930s, I think it's really disappointing and inappropriate to compare government policy on immigration to events in Germany in the 1930s. It's important for the BBC to maintain impartiality if it is to retain the trust of the public who pay the licence fee.
The Transport Secretary says construction of HS2 between Birmingham and Crewe will be delayed by 2 years. Mark Harper says it is due to increased costs and significant inflationary pressure. But Labour says the delay means the North has to pay the price for government failures. Amber weather warnings for snow and ice are in place for parts of the UK until tomorrow, bringing with it a potential risk to life. Blizzards are due to cause treacherous conditions overnight, with 50-mile-per-hour winds and 40 centimetres of snow forecast for some central and northern areas. The Met Office says power cuts and travel delays are likely. The Prime Minister is aiming to strengthen cooperation with France on tackling small boats in the English Channel. Rishi Sunak will meet French President Macron in Paris tomorrow, hoping to implement further measures to prevent illegal migrant crossings. It will be the first UK-France summit in 5 years. At least 9 people have been killed after Russia fired 81 missiles, including 6 hypersonic missiles, across Ukraine. The fresh wave of strikes cut power to the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, Europe's biggest, although it was later restored. The plant was running on emergency diesel generators for the 6th time to prevent a potentially catastrophic meltdown. The Prince and Princess of Wales have praised the communities that are fundraising for those impacted by earthquakes in Turkey and Syria. William and Kate visited a London community centre to speak to aid workers who came back from the disaster zone. They were joined by 2 schoolgirls who made hundreds of origami cranes to raise funds for the appeal. TV, online and DAB plus radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Jacob.
Guardian columnists, student union leaders, Islington dinner party attendees and possibly even some Milton Friedman-loving libertarians may claim that open borders, no nations, as the saying goes, is beneficial for economic growth. But is it? Some migration no doubt is, and today the OECD has said that our openness to high-skilled people is beneficial. But we must be certain of the facts that we're dealing with, because Britain has seen an unprecedented level of unskilled and low-skilled migration over the last few decades. And this has been in spite of politicians of all parties promising that immigration would be controlled. It hasn't been. Net migration was at 500,000 last year. And on our current trajectory, our country may be poorer than Poland per person by 2030. Perhaps, as the journalist Sam Ashworth-Hayes has pointed out, there will be complaints in the Polish press in the not-too-near future about British plumbers undercutting the wages of those in Warsaw. A 2018 report from the Migration Advisory Committee estimated that immigrants actually cost the Exchequer £4.3 billion. I quote, "Immigration does not generate the tax receipts needed for migrants to pay their way, let alone to finance the new infrastructure or anything else required by the rapid population growth." And this is important because as you grow the population, as you see in countries with large populations such as China and India, GDP may increase. But the key is GDP per capita. Are you actually richer individually within the nation rather than has the nation's total income grown? What do I mean by this? Well, roughly speaking, GDP per capita in the UK is £33,000. If you have 500,000 people come in who only earn £15,000, on average, the nation would be poorer. And this is why between 2008 and 2020, an increase in the population of 2.5 million people saw a decrease in GDP per capita, meaning on average we were less well off. And that's before you come to infrastructure. Not talking about schools or medical services and such. The 504,000 new migrants that arrived last year, and that's not much short of the population of Manchester, incidentally, would require roughly 170,000 new homes to be built. Now, we must at some point discuss the planning system on this programme because there are serious problems with that. But if you're adding 170,000 extra houses to the total that is required, in addition to those that you need for people in this country who are already here, who can't buy their own home, with a planning system that is dysfunctional, you know that you're not going to have the houses that you need for the population that you've got. And that's a real problem. And it doesn't matter whether the investment for that is coming from the government or whether it's coming from private individuals. Building a new Manchester every year is a Sisyphean task. And we're not alone in realising this. It's absolutely fascinating how things have changed in other European countries who have been taking measures to reduce both legal and illegal migration. Lefty Sweden has suddenly had to tighten its immigration laws after not wanting to have many controls and is even giving repatriation advice and incentives, something I hope we never do here as it happens. Greece has almost done what Donald Trump wanted and built a wall to prevent 260,000 migrants from entering the EU last year. An immigration bill will reach the French Parliament later this month, which wants to speed up the process of removing those denied asylum. And Denmark is thinking of sending people to Rwanda. That sounds familiar. It seems a very good plan because it's something that we're trying in this country. But in Denmark, it's the Social Democrats who are calling for a cap on migration and stated that the price of globalization, mass immigration and the free movement of labour is paid by the lower classes. And that's the problem, that the poorest are the ones who pay the price of mass migration. Those who are better off are the ones who may benefit from the provision of cheaper services or cheaper hospitality and so on. It's those who are least well off, and I often think of my own constituents who are the least well off, are the ones who are most likely to suffer. The United Kingdom has about 5 million people on out-of-work benefits. Surely our aim should be not short-term increase of migration, but helping those 5 million people so that we can boost our GDP per capita and make everyone in this country better off. As always, I want to know what you think, so please get in touch with me at mailmog@GBNews. But to discuss this further, I'm delighted to be joined by Sean Woodward, the former Northern Ireland Secretary to Gordon Brown. Sean, thank you so much for coming on. I don't know if you remember, but we actually met when I was a migrant worker working out in Hong Kong many years ago. So it's a good opportunity to discuss the benefits and disbenefits of migration. How much control, realistically, do you think we should have? And how much do you think the population, the electorate, want?
Well, first of all, Jacob, it's a pleasure to be on your programme and indeed to see you since Hong Kong days, when I think Chris Patten was then our last governor in Hong Kong. I have to say, my head is spinning from your monologue. My pen and paper ran out on a list of figures. And I have to say, if any of the viewers have followed this, they should get a special Mogg prize. Because at the end of the day, it's an extraordinary number of figures you wheeled out. What I think the essential question here is somehow problems that we face in Britain, skill shortages, going to be resolved, whether we follow your prescription or other people's prescriptions, by dependence on migrant labour. And I think that the key answer here is no, it's not. I mean, we, despite having, as you rightly pointed out, nearly 400,000 net migrants last year, I think record numbers, we've still got around 1.2 million vacancies in the job market. We happen to have around 1.2 million people who are unemployed. But there's currently a dramatic mismatch between those looking for jobs and those who have jobs to offer, and they don't fit. And in a sense, that's really the essence of the problem here. We could talk about immigration, we could talk about net migration, we can even talk about asylum until the cows come home. But the actual numbers of vacancies we're dealing with, the problem of productivity in the economy, is an even much bigger scale than any of the numbers that you've given out tonight. And I think really where we've all got to focus, which is what Keir Starmer was recently talking about, is we've got to be weaned off this subject of migration as the solution to labour. And we've got to start talking about skilling the workforce, the people who are here.
Well, I think that's a really important point, because it seems to me it's not entirely coincidental that over the last perhaps 30 years, when we've seen a big increase in migration, we've had almost no increase in productivity. We've had a very weak performance compared to other countries. And I just wonder whether bringing in unskilled people has meant that businesses haven't had the incentive to invest in productivity increases that might otherwise have helped ensure that we didn't need the level of migration that we've currently got.
Well, there's undoubtedly a need for some migration to deal with some very specific problems. And one example that immediately springs to mind, and I'm sure you and I would both agree on this, last year's crisis in the transport sector, where we didn't have enough lorry drivers to get petrol to petrol stations, that seems to me to be a very good example of where actually issuing visas to people who can come in and drive these lorries would have been very sensible. Being able to do it quickly, expedite these things, would be essential. And again, one of the problems about our current immigration system is how slow it is and how badly it effectively matches the skill shortages to people who are coming in. But having said that, what again strikes me is if you take a sector like the food and accommodation sector, there are currently in that sector something in the order of 7% of jobs not filled. That's somewhere in the region, I think, of about 150,000 jobs we can't fill. Now, if we haven't got people to do those jobs in accommodation and in those sectors related to tourism, we've got a real problem in Britain. And I think one of the things we've got to do, and it's irrespective of whether it's a Conservative government or a Labour government has got to recognise it has a responsibility to do something about matching those, for example, leaving school with having the skills to fill the jobs that are out there.
But surely that comes back to the 5 million who are effectively unemployed at the moment, that entry-level jobs in hospitality and so on require relatively little training and therefore can be filled by people who are currently not in employment, who are already living here.
Well, I think there's a danger in that argument because it becomes a race to the bottom. And if you take an area, for example, like the health service and social care, to some extent we've depended upon migrant labour to do the jobs that are the least well paid with the poorest conditions. And the problem is now we've got a massive shortage in that area because by failing to invest in the technology, by failing to invest in the conditions, by failing to actually have decent levels of pay, we are seeing a mass exodus of those staff on whom we depend to keep our hospitals open, our care homes open, and all of those things that we need in the health and social care sector. And of course, that then plays into the nursing sector as well, because we see this massive gulf between those and their pay in the public sector, the NHS, and in the private sector. So we're seeing tens of thousands of nurses trained leaving the sector. Now, if we don't address that problem because we only focus on a race to the bottom, we are going to be in real crisis in our healthcare system, and we won't be able to fix that in the lifetime of just a new government.
But I'd turn the race to the bottom the other way round, that what we need is to increase the domestic skills and to increase the innovation and the use of technology domestically, rather than bringing in, by and large, cheap, unskilled labour from abroad. And that's what we've relied on, and that's why pay hasn't increased and why technology hasn't been used.
Well, to some extent, that's self-evident, isn't it? Because that's what the numbers have actually done. We've got large numbers of people still wanting to come, and we've got large numbers of vacancies. But if we don't look at, holistically, something like the health service, and recognise that we have to pay nurses at a level that actually matches the private sector, because the market will decide. And as a consequence, these wonderful nurses who've dedicated themselves to the NHS are leaving because the conditions are too difficult, they're too demanding, they're killing for them, they are underpaid. And if we don't address that, as well as at the bottom of the thing, we are going to find our health service simply won't function at all.
But that's a different argument. That's not about bringing in more people from abroad, because that keeps pay low, that we know that the least well-off do worst when you have mass migration. And that's why you see the people who are most concerned and supported Brexit were by and large those on lower wages.
We brought a number of nurses in from outside of the UK, and we've been doing that over the last 20 years. We began filling, for example, in 1997, the huge deficit in numbers of nurses by allowing people to come in and to work from countries outside of the UK. We haven't properly addressed this issue, and in the last 13 or 14 years, this issue has got much, much worse, which is why we're seeing this disaster in the NHS at the moment. It isn't only a problem of people at the bottom who are prepared to clean the floors of our hospitals. It's because we're not paying the people who are our nurses and our junior doctors at a level which is going to keep them in the service. And we are now paying the price for an unmanaged way of recruiting our staff and not remunerating them properly. And therefore, immigration is part of that. But the solution to our problem in the health service is not going to be, as Keir Starmer said, by somehow looking at if we only tweak the immigration system this way and that way, reduce this number or do this, we'll get a fix. We won't. We've got to look at our healthcare system, and what we've got to look at is what we've got to do with that, how we pay people, what the conditions are for those people, the investment we make in the technology, and whether it's in health or social care, or if it's in the food industry or tourism or accommodation, across the piece. Immigration may help us, but at the end of the day, it's not the answer to the problem.
Well, thank you so much, Sean. It's very nice to see you, albeit virtually, again after many years, and much appreciate your time and answers today. Thank you. But I also want to know what you, the viewers, think. So let me know on MailMog at GB News. After the break, we'll be hearing from our distinguished panel on the disaster that is HS2. Stick around, hear about the latest blunder. You don't want to go anywhere unless you're a socialist.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like.
Absolutely.
On Dubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. You've been getting in touch with your thoughts. And Barbara, heroine of the evening, I followed your monologue perfectly. I've been saying the same for years, so it's extremely interesting to see that the figures now show the immigration obsession to be wrong, especially for the well-off. And Sue says halt all immigration and the problem of employment mismatch will solve itself. Needs must. And if I remember rightly, that quotation continues, needs must where the devil drives. Anyway, HS2 has been delayed again. What a surprise, seeing as it's the 73rd time. That can't be true, but that's what it says in front of me, the 73rd time. But this time round, it's an attempt, if you can believe it, to cut costs. Bearing in mind the plan was originally projected to cost £30 billion of your money, taxpayers' money, but it's now projected to reach over £70 billion. Dare I say it's a little late for cost cutting. All of this is ridiculous, and much more for a rail network which cuts a journey from Birmingham to London by a mere 20 minutes or so. I think we should scrap it. We must get away from the sunk cost fallacy. We've spent perhaps £10 billion so far. Actually, 70 billion is a low estimate. It could now be over 100 billion. We should save 90 billion rather than thinking that because we've spent 10 billion, we should go on and on with this project. It's a mistake that governments often fall into because it's embarrassing to say that 10 billion's been written off. The sunk cost fallacy. It's so important that one doesn't get tied into it, swamped by it, to carry on making bad decisions and wasting more money. But I've got a brilliant panel with me, and I'm going to put this question to me. 20 minutes off the trip to Birmingham, is it worth it?
Absolutely not, especially not from Birmingham. But no, I think the HS2 is something that was probably done with the best intentions. And unfortunately, it has fallen as a failure. It's the rest of the entire of the levelling up agenda, essentially. It's something that was brought in as great intentions, and now it's swallowed so much money that it's absolutely not worth it. I mean, it's a great thought to kind of connect more places together, but isn't it? It's kind of anti-levelling up as much as it is pro-levelling up, because it's kind of patronising in the sense that, oh, does everything need to be so connected to London, or can we just sort out the railway network in the rest of the country to be just as effective as it is in London?
Toby?
I think it's a terrible indictment of our civil service, isn't it? Supposedly a Rolls-Royce, more like a Trabant. I mean, as you said in your introductory remarks, it's more than doubled in price. It was originally due to be completed by 2026. I think now the estimate is, at best case, 2037, and possibly the bit that connects Birmingham to Manchester not until 2041. In the meantime, the Chinese, who started in the 2000s have built one of the largest high-speed rail networks in the world. I think it accounts for about 2/3 of the high-speed rail track now in the world. I mean, why is our civil service so hopeless when it comes to, these large capital expenditure projects?
Well, because we've got a dysfunctional planning system is one of the reasons. But also, isn't it out of date post-pandemic that we may have needed new rail conceivably and greater capacity prior to the pandemic, but with people still working from home, much that I think they should go into the office, we don't need the capacity that's being brought on.
No, I think it's a great idea, but it's maybe 3 years out of date now. I mean, essentially, what's the new thing? People go in Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, right? People work from home now. That this is the new world that we're in. Commuting costs are terrible, and they are, especially coming into London. But now people don't have to commute as much. There is just simply no need for it anymore.
And as you pointed out, with half of Whitehall, if not 3/4 of Whitehall now working from home, it's going to be much more difficult to complete these sorts of projects.
Working? You sure? That's very charitable of you. You're so kindly. I'm not at all convinced by that. But economically, isn't it always the case that money's actually better spent on roads? That's what people use, that the number of car journeys is much higher proportion of people's travel than train journeys. And we have this sort of romantic obsession with Thomas the Tank Engine, and we think railways are nice and everyone likes their childhood memories of railways, and government policy shouldn't be made that way.
Also, it's just another excuse for people to go on strike, right? I mean, the rails that we have don't work right now. They're not functioning. I haven't had a train that's either not been over capacity or run on time for the last 6 months. So it's just another thing to be.
Yeah, I've just had to cancel an event on April 1st because of the rail strikes, which are going to affect the Underground and the Overground in London. But is it part of the kind of ongoing war on the motorist, this obsession with becoming greener? Trains are greener than cars, therefore we ought to have high-speed rail and not better roads. And, we're going to have to be confined in 15-minute cities, and the ULEZ zone, as you're about to talk about, is about to be expanded. I mean, it's as though the motorist has become everyone's favourite whipping boy, and there's really no one now, but even in Parliament, to stand up for the motorist.
Well, it's deeply political, isn't it? Because the motorist is the individual encapsulated, whereas the trains are collectivist, and they're collectivist and they don't particularly work, and as you say, they go on strike. I just wonder whether HS2, when it comes in, would need any train drivers, but I bet it'll have them.
Yeah, I expect it will. I mean, as a football fan, I have to say, I was quite looking forward to being able to follow my team, Queen's Park Rangers, by cutting the journey time to places like Preston North End and Sheffield, and indeed Birmingham, as well as West Bromwich Albion. But by the time it's actually completed, if it's ever completed, I imagine, I'll be too old to follow the team around the country.
Well, you might have convinced me had you said you could get to Headingley slightly faster, but that's a different game. Even my distinguished panel of controversialists couldn't disagree on HS2, but still ahead. Our friends and partners across the channel have proposed some unusual new rules, so I'll be digging into that once again with my panellists. Don't go away, don't mog me off.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference. And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen. Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I have walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Welcome back to State of the Nation. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and once again you've been getting in touch with your male Moggs. Ken. Residents along the route have consistently told the government and the people of HS2 that the route was wrong and that the cost was not thought through and would rise exponentially. And residents have been right. Vox Populi, Vox Dei, as I've said before. Sandy, I wish you could come and visit us in Amersham. I did go. There was a by-election near Amersham that I went to. We didn't do terribly well. HS2 has decimated our lovely area and surrounding countryside, including areas very close to Chequers. We all spoke out against it before work started, but we had no idea what damage it would do for most of us to get no benefits from the line at all. Appalling. I have great sympathy with that. The French Parliament has announced its proposed plans to strip parents of the right to share images of their children online, on Instagram and things like this. There's a new private members bill, which is still in its draft phase, which will seek to stop parent sharenting, which they describe as posting pictures of one's children online. And if you do, you might get a social worker taking charge of your child's image. So it's not unusual that the new generation of TikTok parents have been sharing their journeys and pictures. I did on Instagram quite a bit, actually, and my children seem quite to like it. But should I get a visit from social services if I were French to tell me that I shouldn't do it and that they would take charge of my children's image? But I'm delighted to be joined by the Daily Telegraph journalist, Anne-Elizabeth Moutet. Anne-Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining me. I don't know if you remember, but many, many years ago you interviewed me, so I'm very glad to meet you again decades later, but not in the flesh. Tell me more about what the proposals are.
You were quite stunning and you were age 14.
It's quite a long time ago because I'm now 53 and we haven't met since, but we mustn't reminisce. We must get down to business. What is this? Is it a serious proposition or is it a rule that won't go anywhere?
It's being now discussed in the Senate. It's very interesting that for the first time in a month, the French National Assembly found itself left and right in agreement over that law. And of course, described as you do, you describe the excesses before describing the law, and the excesses are obviously sort of a threat to civil liberties. But if you think that by the time a child is 13, their parents have shared about 2,000 pictures of them, and that about 60% of the appalling pictures that you find on paedophile websites are using and then sort of changing a bit the pictures of children that are found on social media, you can see that there's a matter for worry. And there's also a matter for worry when some parents who really, you don't believe they exist, but they do exist, treat their children and indeed even their pets and they probably see them both exactly in the same way, in sort of strange and not exactly degrading, but really stupid things like throwing a slice of cheese on the face of a baby or an animal and seeing their reactions. And then you get stupid laughter in the background. And that's just one of those stupid ideas.
But
so all of this is excess, but you are allowed to share your pictures, your children's pictures.
Yeah, but aren't parents allowed to be stupid? I absolutely see you certainly don't want paedophile rings using these pictures, but parents are allowed to be silly and show the pictures to their friends?
There's a limit to the silliness, and I think actually it's one of those things when you actually know it, when you see it, and again you get babies. I mean, some of them find this funny, but some of them get crying, and you still hear laughter in the background. And we're talking small babies. We're talking babies who are under 2. It's not pleasant. And if you remember, that kind of thing leads to this footballer who kicked his cat, and he was being filmed by his brother, and they all thought it was great entertainment to be kicking the small cat with a big boot. So that's you get cats, you get people to react about cats, but children surely at least deserve as much respect as cats.
Children, I agree with that. Thanks so much, Anne Elizabeth, and I hope we meet in person in the not-too-distant future. But my excellent panel is still with me, Toby Young of the Free Speech Union and Cara Kennedy of The Spectator USA. Clearly one shouldn't be laughing at children crying and things like that, but is the answer to put social workers in charge?
No, I don't think so. I mean, it feels like state overreach and in some ways typically French. I mean, if you want to encourage parents to be a little bit more responsible, I don't think the way to do it is to threaten them with prosecution if they put pictures of their children doing silly things on social media. You could persuade them, you can educate them, but to threaten them with having their children's image rights taken away and handed over to a social worker seems like state overreach. I mean, this is a problem that I encounter as a columnist in a way, Jacob. So I'm constantly kind of looking for material to fill my Spectator column with. And I often find myself writing about my children. But recently they've started to object because Rachel Johnson, Boris Johnson's sister, she told my children that she has a deal with hers whereby whenever she writes about one of her children in one of her columns, she gives them £75. And my children demand £75 whenever I write about it, which just very quickly stop me writing about it.
We're not after the watershed, and my children may be watching, so I think that's a really bad idea. Cara, you have concerns about TikTok.
So I am the most anti-TikTok Gen Z 24-year-old, I think, because I've seen firsthand the danger of this app. I mean, it is Chinese fentanyl, essentially, that is being distributed to the public, to American and British children from the age of 2 years old. People have TikTok accounts. I mean, it's deplorable how parents let their children be so absorbed into this terrible social media.
But your concern is more about parents allowing their children onto social media rather than putting pictures of their own children onto social media.
Well, I think I would totally agree with Toby if I hadn't firsthand seen the issues with TikTok. It's incredibly dangerous. It's an incredibly, I think, underestimated social media. I mean, billions and billions of people sign up to this. Every hashtag you see has multiple billions of people looking at it. I mean, this is a massive amount of the population watching these videos. So if I was a parent, no, I would not put my children on social media just in case they get onto TikTok. Never mind on TikTok personally.
I've been quite relaxed about putting my own... I got Alfred to learn how to say back Brexit when he was quite little, which I put onto Instagram.
That was more innocent times,
That was more innocent times.
I enlisted my own son, who was something like 12 at the time, in the Leave campaign as well. And I think he now is slightly cross about it. But, you know, I think, I mean, a neighbour of mine has enlisted their daughter, who wasn't 18, I think, when this began, onto TikTok, and she became, I think actually of her own volition, became a TikTok star. She didn't do very much. She mimed to songs, she smiled in a particularly engaging way, and suddenly she had this kind of global following, millions, if not tens of millions of people all over the world, and she's become kind of incredibly famous and rich as a consequence. And, you know, I don't think she in any way regrets kind of her TikTok fame. I mean, I think one of the problems with this new law, if it does become a law in France, is are you not just going to stop parents putting pictures of their children on social media, but stop children from putting pictures of themselves and their friends on social media? And that sort of that again seems a little bit draconian, a little bit too much. Do we really need to restrict children's liberty when we know, of course, I'm sure overuse of social media platforms is damaging to children's psychological health, but can't it be done in moderation? Can't we expect parents to police this behaviour a little bit and not just assume it's the state's responsibility to protect children?
It's taking responsibility away from parents. Do you remember the SNP wanted to have every child in Scotland have a named adult appointed by the state who was responsible for that child over and above the parents? And I thought that was deeply sinister. I certainly wouldn't want to see that happen here.
No, I do, and I do agree with you. If it was to do with Instagram or Facebook or other social medias, but I have seen TikTok, it is so, I mean, there's just nothing like it. We were talking in the green room about going on TikTok, and it's in your mind. You can mention something on your phone 20 minutes before. 20 minutes later, you will find exactly something that could only have come from your mind, exactly that on your screen. It is so consuming. I can go on TikTok and 5 hours later, I don't know where that 5 hours have gone. It's so there, and I think the fact that we're all so plugged into it is why I would never, ever want my children to be on it. Not in a way that I would put limits on anything else that my children were on. I don't believe in these draconian, overreaching laws by the state. But,
thank you.
But with TikTok.
Very much. It won't surprise you to know the only TikTok I have personally, excluding my children, is a grandfather clock that goes TikTok very nicely. But thank you to both my panellists for that. We hope to see them next week. Coming up next, you les or you lose. People aren't happy about the war on the motorist. Find out what's happened after the break and keep Mogg on the box.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even some ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
Welcome back to State of the Nation with me, Jacob Rees-Mogg. Once again, you've been getting in touch with your male Moggs. Travis. With regards to the French proposal, I understand the need for child protection. However, we should not do anything to restrict freedom of speech and expression. Stuart says, I completely agree with not showing pictures of children or grandchildren, as it could come back to bite them when they're older. There are way too many bad people out there. I must confess, I do try and make sure the pictures I put of my children on won't be embarrassing to them in later life, unless you count wearing a blue rosette as potentially embarrassing. But then you're a socialist and probably wrong. Anyway, I'm absolutely delighted to have Peter Whittle with me this evening to talk about ULEZ, but also the New Culture Forum, which you set up and are running. But let's start with ULEZ. Yeah. And the war on the motorist. If we're to get to net zero, aren't we going to have a war on the motorist, and aren't those of us who like our petrol engines just going to have to lump it?
No, I don't think so. I think that you're quite right to call it a war on the motorist. I think that there is a strong ideological element to this attack on the car, actually. I think it's actually going to become a much bigger issue as we go on, regardless of what happens with ULEZ, which is an extraordinarily unfair and unpopular tax, basically, on people outside of London, which in fact will hit the poorest people the most. And what I find sort of oddest, if you're talking about environmental issues, Jacob, what is weird about this is that, you know, we have an ideologically motivated mayor. And one of those ideologies is obviously cycling and cycling lanes. I'm sure you go around London all the time, like I do every day. If you want to create bad air quality, the one way of doing it is to put loads of cycling lanes in, which no one uses, or sometimes they're completely empty. And so you have gridlock traffic just standing there pumping out fumes. So, I mean, this is utterly ridiculous.
And how worried should we be about people damaging the cameras, the ULEZ cameras? And this did happen when speed cameras first came in. It's always a bad sign when people take the law into their own hands. It's against the rule of law, but it sometimes shows that the politicians have moved so far away from what people are willing to tolerate that they end up taking extreme action.
Yes, I mean, obviously, you know, one doesn't want, you know, people to damage public property. But when you have a situation where, in this case, the mayor is simply not listening, there was a consultation about this which showed that people were against it. Most of the people, in fact, in the outside boroughs in London, it goes right into the home counties as well, I might add, are against it. There is a level of frustration there, obviously, particularly, I might add, when, as happened last week, the mayor then starts calling you far right for basically simply protesting against the ULEZ.
Isn't the basis for it bordering on dishonest, because it's about air quality? And a lot of the places where it's being imposed don't have any problem with air quality. People understand that the very centre of London may do. Yes. But once you get into the London suburbs, the air is very pure.
Well, exactly. Your colleague, Gareth Bacon, MP, has been very, very good on this.
He's great. He used to be my PPS. He is a great man.
Oh, right. Well, he's been very, very good on this. He's MP for Orpington. He's made the point that obviously the air quality is quite different in places like Orpington. Also, people rely on their cars, I mean, far more in those places. Access to public transport is really not great. but also they are fundamentally different places. You know, some of them are almost villagey in many ways. And so what you've got is a mayor who's trying to convince them that, in fact, the situation they face is as bad or indeed, if not worse, than in central London.
OK, but the mayor's got a mandate for it, hasn't he? That he won the popular vote only a year ago. Doesn't he have the right to do this, even if people like us don't like it?
Well, not necessarily, actually, because, I mean, the fact is that politicians put things in their manifestos all the time. But the fact is, once you have done various feasibility studies and consultations, the picture changes. And I think in this case, for example, one study showed that, in fact, the effect on air quality was, in fact, minimal. Right? That was quite recent. And so, in fact, any politician should listen. And this is a particularly ideological and a particularly arrogant mayor.
But he has a mandate to be ideological. That's, you know, he won.
Well,
you may not like this, but he did win the mandate.
But I think that that's too simplistic way of looking at it. Circumstances change. What's happened since he, you know, won the mandate, if you like, is that basically we have a situation where Londoners are hugely suffering now financially. We've had, obviously, the lockdown and pandemic. People are struggling. The last thing they need now is to have to pay £12.50 charge to come into London. That includes tradesmen, not just people in their own cars.
And it hits the least well off, because they're the ones with the older vehicles who will be the most emitting.
Exactly.
I wonder if we can come on to the New Cultural Forum, because you're doing a series, am I right, that is going to update Kenneth Civilization Clarke, not to be confused with Kenneth Europhile Clarke, who is a very distinguished figure in the Tory party, but
updating. Oh, wow. Well, that is an extraordinary a compliment to pay it. Yes, what we're doing, Jacob, the New Culture Forum believes in defending Western culture and Western civilization since we started in 2006. We have just made a 6-part series on basically why Western civilization is a good thing and why it has achieved what it has and why it should be defended. It will be on YouTube as of the 28th of March. We have drawn inspiration from Kenneth Clarke's famous 1969 series, I think it was. Put it this way, the BBC would never be able to make a series like that now with any confidence, even if they wanted to, because they don't want to. And so I think it's fallen really to new media to do it. It's presented by Mark Sidwell. And basically, the point behind it really is quite simply this, is that we want to be able to tell people, particularly young people, why they should defend Western civilization.
You're not going to say why they should be proud of their country and their civilization and shocking things like that, are you?
All of that. I mean,
cancelled.
it's not going to be sort of just a total hagiography of the West by any means, but it will look at all the different strains that have made the West unique. You know, philosophical, scientific, artistic, democratic. And I think that the crucial thing, and what I hope happens with this, is that it arms people with the knowledge. Because at the moment, there is, without question, an outright attack, I think, on the West. We see it on a daily basis, whether it's in small things like trying to change classic books all the way through to critical race theory and everything. And I think the function of this series, and what will be a great success for this series, is if actually it tells people, look, this is what you can say when you're in argument. This is what the West has done. This is what makes it so brilliant.
Well, it sounds very interesting. We must all tune in when it comes out. You must watch GB News first. Thank you, Peter. That's all from us. We'll be back tomorrow night, though not me, from 8 p.m. Up next, it's Patrick Christie's in for his last night, covering from Downwood. And Patrick, you have the best work ethic of anybody I know. What have you got in store tonight?
Well, Jacob, another cracking show from you, may I say. I am going to be talking about why I don't think the British taxpayer should be paying reparations for the slave trade to the Caribbean, so I'll be going in with that. Anne Widdecombe joins me. She's going to tee off on Emmanuel Macron. I've got Kelvin Mackenzie and footballer Matt Letizia as well to get stuck into Gary Lineker, so all of that coming your way and more.
Well, that sounds absolutely wonderful. It reminds me of the terrible joke. My wife went to the Caribbean, Jamaica. No, she went of her own accord. That's all coming up after the weather, and you won't want to miss it because the weather's a bit chilly at the moment, even in Somerset. But I'm back next week from 8 p.m. Up till then, keep it Moggalicious.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin, and this is your latest weather update from the Met Office. We have issued amber weather warnings for parts of Northern Ireland, Northern England and Wales. Heavy snow continuing to fall here into the night. This area of low pressure is responsible. The winds also picking up as the wet weather moves in, hitting the cold air. That's where we're seeing the heaviest snowfall, starting to turn more to rain over parts of the Midlands this evening. But as I say, for Wales, parts of Northern England and Northern Ireland, heavy snow will continuing, blown around by gusty winds, some atrocious travelling conditions. Power issues are also possible, as well as the potential for some rural communities to be cut off by 10 to 20 centimetres of snow, maybe over the hills of northern England, 40 centimetres of snow. In the south, it's mostly rain because it's milder here. Further north across Scotland, most places dry, but it could be icy in northern Scotland, and it will again be well below freezing here on Friday. The snow easing by the morning over Northern Ireland and steadily petering out over northern England and Wales through the morning as well, but still further sleet and snow likely over eastern England well into Friday, and then steadily pushing a little further south, blown along by a cold wind. For many further west, it's a bright, fine day tomorrow, lots of sunshine. But of course, there'll still be quite a bit of snow lying on the ground, and it will feel cold at 4 or 5 Celsius, a colder feel in the south after things have turned a bit milder today. Look at this, the blue taking hold of the chart on Friday evening. There will be a hard frost across the country for the start of the weekend. Further snow showers coming in across northern Scotland. Again, potentially quite icy here. Still, for many, Saturday will be another bright, fine day. As we go through the morning, though, the cloud will thicken with outbreaks of rain coming into...
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236,
And YouView Channel 236.